Well, this morning, my message is entitled, Your Three Lives. You know what? Pastor Dave becomes some new ager, we're all going to be reincarnated? No, that's not what it means. Actually, a better description would be the three stages of our life. Now, as you've heard me say many, many times, remember when Paul told the church of Thessalonica, he said that he, meaning the Lord, may sanctify you wholly, body, soul, and spirit. And I know you've heard me say this many times. Our situation, our being as a whole is you are a spirit, you have a soul, and you live in a body. Well, our three lives are stages that we go through to develop. You are a body, you have a body, you are a soul, and you are a spirit, and you have a soul. And how these things are developed. And the first stage that we go through is in the womb. And the length of time that stage or that portion of our existence lasts is approximately 9 months. Some people a little bit less, some people, I don't know if anyone's ever gone 10 months. There's probably a lot of women that feel like they went 10 months. But while we're in this stage of the womb, we're basically out of control. It's all up to our mother. Our mother is the one who is the greatest influencer on us. She can influence our stage in the womb by a number of things. One being diet. What your mother eats. I've heard a lot of women say, oh, I had tacos last night and the baby's kicking me like crazy. What you eat, if you have a lousy diet, the child's not going to be as well nourished. If you eat very well, that child will be more nourished. If the mother is involved in some types of substance abuse, some people use drugs, some mothers smoke, they drink, and that affects the baby. There's some babies that have actually been born addicted to heroin or other drugs. And then, of course, exercise. If the mother gets exercise or just sits around and does nothing, that's going to affect the baby. And then there's diseases. Some babies were born with AIDS. Sexually transmitted diseases can be carried over to the children. If the mother has certain ailments, that is wrapped in the DNA and that can be passed on to the baby. And then, of course, the greatest influence a mother has on the baby is if that mother decides to abort. Well, that's going to affect the baby greatly. But the whole purpose of this stage of our existence called the womb is to form and develop our physical bodies. But in reality, our mothers, God has given the mothers this much control and responsibility. Like my mother smoked and drank. And I turned out semi-normal, I think. But the way the mothers treat their bodies, it affects the baby. But ultimately, the one who's always in control is God himself. In Psalm 139, verse 13, this is what David said. For thou hast possessed my reins. Thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. And in his mother's womb, God covered him. He created this body. In Psalm 139, verse 14, it says, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. So look around the room. All these people, you know what? You're all a miracle. You're marvelous. I didn't say this, God did. You're a miracle. The fact that you have a body, because, you know, did you ever play Monopoly? If you don't have a piece on the board, you can't play. And if you don't have a physical body, you can't play the game of life. And your mother is used as the instrument or as the environment that God forms you and forms this body out of nothing. Now, I'm going to give you a real quick, I promise I'll make it quick, biology quiz, or biology lesson here. And I won't get too graphic, but some things I have to explain in the whole process of when David says we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Just think, this body that you're living in came out of nothing. It didn't exist. The first thing that happens during fertilization, the sperm and the egg unite in one of the fallopian tubes to form what's called a zygote. Then the zygote travels down the fallopian tube where it becomes a morula. Once it reaches the uterus, the morula becomes a blastocyst. Then the blastocyst then burrows into the uterine lining through a process called implantation. And what did you have to do with that? Absolutely nothing. Do you remember that? I tried to think back. I can't remember that.
It was a long trip.
Long trip. And the fourth week, the baby is developing the structures that will form their face and neck. The heart and blood vessels continue to develop, and the lungs, stomach, and liver start to develop. In 8 weeks, the baby is now a little over ½ an inch in size. I look around at the size of some of you. At one time, you were only ½ inch big. And you can, and the eyelids and ears are forming, and you can see the tip of the nose. The arms and the legs are well formed. The fingers and the toes begin to grow longer and more distinct. After 12 weeks, the baby measures about 2 inches and starts to make its own movements. A doctor may hear the baby's heartbeat with special instrumentation. The sex organs of the baby should start to become more clear. After 16 weeks, the baby now measures about 4.3 to 4.6 inches and weighs about 3.5 ounces. Well, I haven't weighed 3.5 ounces in a long time. The baby's eyes can blink, and the head and the blood vessels are fully formed. The baby's fingers and toes have fingerprints. Just think of that. You're only 4 inches long, but your fingers and toes have fingerprints. And that's what makes you distinct from every other human being that has ever lived. I hear now that our population is up to 8 billion people. And who knows how many people have lived before us. Nobody in existence has the same fingerprints you do. And that's taking place that early, in 16 weeks, when you're only 4 inches long. Talk about being fearfully and wonderfully made and marvelous work of God. 20 weeks, the baby weighs about 10 ounces and is a little more than 6 inches long. The baby can suck his thumb, yawn, stretch, and make faces. The mother will feel her baby move. After 24 weeks, the baby weighs about 1.4 pounds now and responds to sounds by moving or increasing their pulse. The mother will notice jerking motions if the baby hiccups. I've heard people say, or women say, I can't eat or drink this because it gives my baby hiccups. And I'm thinking, how do you know that? Believe me, they know. With the inner ear fully developed, the baby may be able to sense being upside down in the womb. 28 weeks, the baby weighs about 2 pounds, 6 ounces, and changes positions often at this point in the pregnancy. 32 weeks, the baby weighs almost 4 pounds and is moving around often. The baby's skin has fewer wrinkles as a layer of fat starts to form under the skin. Between now and the time of delivery, the baby will gain up to half their birth weight. 36 weeks. Babies differ in size depending on many factors, such as gender, the number of babies being carried, the size of the parents. On average, a baby at this stage is about 18.5 inches and weighs close to 6 pounds. The brain has been developing rapidly. Lungs are nearly fully developed. The head is usually positioned down into the pelvis by now. The baby is considered at term when they are 37 weeks. They are an early term baby if born between 37 to 39 weeks. They're considered at term if they're 39 to 40 weeks, and late term if they are 41 to 42 weeks. All that out of nothing. Because your mommy and daddy one day decided to get together, and God created this body that you're living in out of nothing. And the whole purpose of that stage that lasts on average about 9 months is to develop this body. Now, a lot of things come into play. Your mother, how she treated her body, your mother and father, their genetics, but also just a lot of other things. David said, I was conceived in sin. The sin nature plays a part in our development as a body. So, without a body, you can't play the game of life. And if I was to ask you at that stage of your life, so how do you like it in here? You'd say, oh, it's great. Nice and warm. I'm protected. I can hear mom's heart beating. It's very comforting. And, anything I want to eat, I just kick mom in the bladder, and she gives me something to eat, and I get fed right here through my belly button, and it just couldn't be better. I don't have to go to work. I just got it made. Don't have to worry about anything. Well, what if I came up to you and said, well, you better enjoy it because it's not going to last? Well, what are you talking about? This is all I've ever known. This is the only thing that exists. And I'd say, well, someday you're going to turn upside down, and you're going to come out into a world, and you're going to see strangers pull you out away from your mama, and they're going to hang you upside down by your feet and slap you on the gluteus maximus. And you go, why? What did I do wrong? You didn't do nothing wrong. And you know what? They're going to cut that umbilical cord, so mommy's not going to feed you anymore, and you're now going to eat through your mouth. Eat through my mouth? Why would I do a crazy thing like that? Really? And then these eyes, you're going to see all kinds of brilliant colors you've never seen before. I don't believe that. I've never seen any of these colors. You're crazy. Leave me alone. This is all I've ever known. This is all I'm ever going to be. Well, guess what? Would I have been right if I told you that in your mother's womb? Which leads us to the next stage of our existence, and that's living on the planet Earth, or you want to term it living in the world. Now, this stage of our existence lasts on average 80 years and 10. In Psalm chapter 90, verse 10, it says this: the days of our years are 80 years and 10. By the way, a score is 20. So what's 3 times 20?
60.
60. Plus 10? 70. So on average, this part of your existence in the planet Earth, your journey from the womb to the tomb, is about 70 years. Now, at one time, people lived to be 900. Then they lived to be 500. Then they lived to be 100. And now it's been dwindling. But then he goes on to say, and if by reason of strength they be 80 years. 4. What's 4 times 20? 80. So on average, people live to be 70 to 80. Now, Babette's aunt lived to be 103. Her parents both lived to be 95. So this is just an average. Some people die much younger. Some people die as teenagers. Some people die as, in their 20s or their 30s. But this is the average length from the womb to the tomb, is 70 to 80 years. And it says, yet is their strength labor and sorrow. Because remember he said, if by reason of strength, 80 years. But their strength is labor and sorrow. Now in this journey from the womb to the tomb, the first stage of your existence was pretty cushy and comfy with Mama. But in this stage, there's a lot of other factors that come into play. And, you can, like Job says, as surely as sparks fly upward, man is born to sorrow. Some people have a lot of sorrow in their life. Some people have a pretty nice and easy life, just an easy coast. And also how hard you have to work physically. That wears on this physical body. So there's a lot of things that come into play. But then he says, for it is soon cut off, what is? This life, this body, and we fly away. So someday, I don't want to scare you, but this body is going to cut off. Someday that body that you're living in You're not going to live in it anymore. And it's just like I can take my winter coat off in the winter and just keep on walking. Someday I'm going to drop out of this body and the real me is going to come out, which will lead us to the next stage, but I don't want to get there yet. Now, in this stage of our life, from the womb to the tomb, we think we're in control. But unfortunately, we do have free will. Remember what Paul told the Corinthians when he was describing what love is, and God is love. So really, he was given the characteristics of God. And one of them is love doesn't demand its own way. And God never makes any of us do anything. Have you ever had God show up? Dave, today you're going to your neighbor's house. I said right now. It's never happened to me. Now, that still small voice will lead me in different directions. But if I say, no, not interested, I don't have to. I can do whatever I want. Now, of course, there's consequences to be paid. But basically, we are in control of ourselves, but only to a certain degree. Because there's this struggle between our free will and God's plans. In Psalm 37, verse 23, David says this: "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way." When God put us here on the planet Earth, he had a plan for us. He didn't just say, I think I need a couple more people. And then he just threw us out like dealing cards in a card game. I'll just throw some of that out and see what happens. That's not how God works. Everything is precisely calculated. Now, he tells us in his word that before the foundations of the earth were laid, he knew us. Just think about that. Before God said, let there be light, he knew you were going to be here right now today listening to me. He knew that. So there is a plan. You don't have to follow that plan, but there is a set, laid out plan. Now, the influences in our life in the second stage of our existence, from the womb to the tomb, we have a lot of influences. One of them is our parents. Now, some people are born and they know their parents, and they have a great relationship with them. They feel very loved and cherished. Some people don't know who their father is, or don't know who their mother is, or don't know who either one of them are. They're adopted. And some people have very good parents that love them and treat them well and feed them well and raise them in the admonition of the Lord. But other people have parents that are terrible. They abuse them. That does something to you. When we're first born, just think of your brain as like a computer. There's nothing in the memory banks. And what happens to us as children feeds into that memory banks, and it adds information to that tape loop. And that influences us. And some people will say, like I heard the story that John Wesley's mother, when she used to lay him down to go to bed every night, she would put him in his crib and she'd pray over him and she'd say, you're going to be a mighty man of God. God's going to use you and you're going to change your entire generation. And guess what? That's what he did. That was fed into him, and that changed him. Now, you know my story, and I don't blame my stepdad because he's just repeating what was in his tape loop, but he used to tell me, you were an accident, you should have never been born, you don't deserve to breathe air. That had an effect on me, how I grew myself, or affected how I grew as I raised from a child to an adult. The other thing that affects us is our geography. If you're born in Zimbabwe or you're born in Ireland, you're going to be a different person because the culture is different. If you're raised in northern Michigan or you're raised in New Orleans, you're going to be a different kind of person. And the society that you grow up in, like if you're raised in, where everyone is Muslim, or everybody is Jehovah's Witness, or everybody is Christian, and your surroundings, your society, the group of people that you associate with. If you're raised in a family of atheists, that's all you know. Also, the government. If you're born into a family that's living in Russia, versus a family that's born in Switzerland, or you're born into a family in the United States, that's going to change who you are. Also, the time of history that you're born into. If you were born in Europe during the Middle Ages, in the midst of the bubonic plague, or you're born in the United States during the Great Depression, or if you're born in the United States during the baby boom generation, like a lot of us were, when everything was good, the war's over, everything's growing, that's why they called it the boom. Everything is booming and growing. That's going to have an effect on you. But the whole purpose of this journey from the womb to the tomb, just as our first one is to develop our body, the second one is to develop our soul. And the soul is comprised of the mind, the way we logically think, and the heart, the way we emotionally feel. And all these things that happen to us in our life, it's just a forming process. It's a testing process. Now, I've heard it said before, it doesn't matter how you start. What only matters is how you end. And one of the greatest quotes I ever heard that affected my thinking is, life consists of 10% what happens to you and 90% of how you respond to it. We have no say-so in who we were born to, what time in history, where on the planet Earth. But me, as a free will individual, I can make of my life anything I want. And with God's help, nothing is impossible. In Romans chapter 8 and verse 18, it says this, "For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us." We look at this world that we're living in today, there's a lot of suffering. If you don't believe me, ask the people in Ukraine. I just heard yesterday, I won't go into all the gory details about a family and how they raise their children. And it's horrendous. There's suffering in this world. But all the sufferings that people could go through, some people, the worst thing that ever happened to them is their neighbor doesn't like them. Other people have had nothing but heartache from the time they were born. But no matter what you've gone through, it's not even worthy to be mentioned or compared to the glory that's waiting for us in the next stage of our life. Now, during I gave you a description of what happens in the human development of the body. In our journey from the womb to the tomb, we go through different stages. The first one is infancy and toddlerhood. All I can remember about that is I must have been around 2 or 3, and I can remember one time in my grandma's basement, which is where I was raised, my mom looking at me and saying, "Would you quit asking me questions? I don't know." You know, you heard the terrible twos, and you're always asking, "What about this?" I must have drove my mom crazy because I was asking about everything. The mind's developing. We're inquisitive. We want to know about this world that we're living in. And then there's early childhood. When you start to remember your first day in kindergarten? First day you had to leave mom. Now, I never went on a bus. I had to walk to school. But some people, put their kids on the bus for the first time. And then there's middle childhood, when you're like in the 6th and 7th grade. And then there's good old adolescence. What Mark Twain said is when a child turns 13, you should put him in a large barrel and seal that barrel. But leave a hole open enough to feed him. But when that child turns 16, seal up the hole. My poor mother, I aged her 100 years while I was a teenager. I broke that woman's heart 1,000 times. And adolescence, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And I wouldn't want to go back and repeat it for anybody. Upcoming next month is my high school. We're having our 50th high school reunion. It sounds impossible, but it is. And some of these people I'm going to see, I haven't seen since the 8th grade. And I'm going to have flashbacks just remembering some of the things I went through then. And then there's early adulthood, when you're in your 20s and you're like venturing out away from mom and dad. You get your first car, you get your first apartment, your first house, your first girlfriend, your first job, all these firsts. Everything's exciting. And in my early 20s, I was pretty crazy. But when I was 22, I gave my life to Jesus, and that was the most important, monumental thing that ever took place in my life. But then there's middle adulthood, when you're like in your 30s and you're raising a family and getting married and maybe moving up in your job and maybe buying a home and doing things like that. And then there's late adulthood. Now, I don't know if you've experienced this or not, but let me give you a hint to let you know if you're in late adulthood. If it hurts to go like this, and it hurts to get up out of the chair. I remember when I used to just get up out of the chair and move. Now, there's something wrong with my chair, because every time I get out of the chair, I hear this, ow, ooh, ah. Like, what's wrong with my chair? I never did that when I was 20. But that's late adulthood. And that's when we're getting closer to our 70 or 80 years. Now, the purpose of this part of our journey, from the womb to the tomb, is to develop the heart, our seat of emotions, and our mind the way we logically think. It's called the soul. That's why Jesus says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but to lose his very own soul? You know, speaking of Dennis Cole, I told you he's coming here next month. One of his famous lines that I always remember, he says, winning at the losing game. And we always say, top of the heap, number one. No one's going to tell me what to do. I'm going to get control. I'm going to be the top dog in the whole world. Well, guess what? That's the losing game. Because Jesus said, heaven and earth are going to pass away, but my words will never pass away. If our goal from the womb to the tomb is just try to get the most stuff, be the most important, and the most powerful, and have the most money, you're missing the whole purpose of your journey from the womb to the tomb. You can't take any of that with you. The whole purpose of this is to develop our soul. And that's why Jesus said how great it would be. He says, or in other words, what can you give in exchange for your soul? What could you get on the planet Earth in your journey that would be comparable to your very own soul? He took 9 months to develop your body. And he's taken 70 to 80 years to develop your soul. And you're going to throw that all out to get a big house? Now, there's nothing wrong with getting a big house, but at the cost of your soul? Or to get more toys than anyone else? And there's nothing wrong with owning anything, but at the cost of losing your very own soul? So we need to look at the big picture and see, why are we here in the first place? Now, I heard a story once that if you take a caterpillar, did you ever see a caterpillar? About that big, kind of funny looking. They don't move real fast. And they, maybe in their whole life they move from one leaf to another. And all they do is they just sit there and they eat. And they eat and they eat and they eat. And they don't move very far. And then one day that caterpillar, who started out as a larva, and that larva became a caterpillar, and he didn't move very far from where he was born. And he's just eating and eating and eating. And one day he wraps himself in this cocoon and he goes to sleep. And while he's in that cocoon, safe from the rest of the world, something happens. It's called metamorphosis. That, I mean, what's nice to look at about a caterpillar? Some of them have a little color to them, but there's not much to look at. But they come in, this metamorphosis, they come into this shape of the most beautiful butterfly, and they burst through that cocoon, and in 1 second, they fly farther than they ever did in their whole life as a cocoon. And in our journey, I've been with a number of people in nursing homes, and I love to visit people in nursing homes for 2 reasons. One, people like to talk about their life. And you know what? If you talk to anyone long enough, people are interesting. They've lived interesting lives, and they like to tell you that. But the other thing is, I'm watching people start to transition from this stage of their life to the next one. And I've been with people who could buy and sell me 100 times over. And they'll tell me stories about all the houses they owned and the boats and the cars and the motorcycles and the RVs and the trips they went on, the restaurants, the famous people that they met. But they're now in one room of a nursing home in a gown. And the few clothes that they ever do change to is just in this one little skinny little closet. And they once owned so much, or they were once so powerful, and now they can barely even walk. They gotta lay in bed and use a bedpan. And I look at them, but I think if that person is a believer in Jesus, and they know Jesus, they're starting to get into their cocoon stage. Everything around them is fading away. They're getting in their cocoon stage, and they're about to burst forth and become that beautiful butterfly that's waiting for us in stage 3. And in that stage, the length of time is forever. It's eternity. Now, just as in these other 2 stages there was influences in our life, in this stage there's only one influencer. His name is God. Because in eternity, we're going to His kingdom. And remember the Lord's Prayer? You know, Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. God's will is only done in heaven. Nobody does anything in heaven except what He wants. And that's the way His eternity, His kingdom is going to be. God's will. God has a plan. God's will. What He wants, like Jesus said, not my will, but Thy will be done. That's what it's going to be like in the 3rd stage of our life, eternity. And God's got a plan. I don't know what it is. But He didn't just make us just for no reason at all. He's got a plan. When He said, you know, let there be light, He knew what was going to happen. He knew that this beautiful archangel He created, the most high and holy cherub by the name of Lucifer, was going to go haywire and go form a mutiny against Him. You think that took God by surprise? And He said, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. What am I going to do? No, He knew. But He let it happen anyhow. Why? I have to ask Him that. I don't understand that fully. But He knew. But God's will and God's plan, He has a plan for us. Right now, we're living in a world, this little marble floating in space with 8 billion people on it. And guess what? Are you sitting down? I don't want to scare you. They're all a bunch of sinners. And you know what? So are we. 8 billion sinners on a floating marble that's spinning around the sun. And there's a crazy, insane landlord that's running the world. His name is Satan. Because Adam gave up his birthright for something to eat. This one tree in the Garden of Eden, God told him not to. Just as Esau gave up his birthright to Jacob for something to eat. And legally, that's why he's called the God of this world, small g. But the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. God owns this planet, and everything belongs to Him. But for a small space in time, He's letting Satan run wild. And we live in this crazy world. But someday, that's going to change. And God's got a plan. But in His kingdom, His plan is going to be revealed to us. So ultimately, in eternity, the 3rd stage of our life, God's in total control. And you know what? That's okay with me. Because I've learned, I'm 68 years into my journey from the womb of the tomb, but I've learned pretty solidly that God's ways work and mine don't. So if I live in a kingdom where it's totally the way He wants it to be, I'm not going to be disappointed. And the purpose of this eternity is for God to share His purpose with us. Now, what's the method? I told you the method of how we get a body in the womb, and I told you the method of how we advance in our stage to develop our soul. And, well, you are a spirit, you have a soul, you live in a body. The first part was to give you that body. The second part was to develop that soul. The third part is to let you become all that you can as a spirit. But the way He does this, in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 2, John says, Beloved, Now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. So what's it going to be like in this eternity? I don't quite know. Just as when I was in my mother's womb, I couldn't fully understand eating a burrito supreme and listening to beautiful music and seeing a sunrise. I couldn't even comprehend while I was in my mother's womb what that was like. Now that I'm in stage 2, I can't fully comprehend what stage 3 is going to be like, but I know I'm going to be like him. And what was Jesus like? You know, I've had people say, well, do you think in heaven we'll know each other? Of course we will. Now, I ain't going to look the same way when you see me over there. But Jesus, when he appeared in the upper room after the resurrection, he said, touch me, handle me. He was tangible. He wasn't just some ethereal spirit floating in the netherland. He had some tangibility to him. He said, touch me. But then he just disappeared. Then, all of a sudden, he appeared to 500, then he disappeared, and then he went over and he appeared on the shore and made a fire for Peter and the guys to come over and have a fish dinner. And then he disappeared. And then he went to the Mount of Olives and ascended up into the clouds and disappeared. We're going to be able to do that. How? I don't know. But the Bible says we shall be like him. And here's the best part of all. And we shall see him as he is. Amen. Remember when John saw Jesus on the Isle of Patmos? Now John is known as the disciple that Jesus loved. John is the one who was the inner circle, Peter, James, and John. John is the one who put his head on Jesus' chest and said, Lord, am I the one that's going to betray you? John is the one who was at the foot of the cross, the only disciple that had the guts to stand there and watch Jesus die. And John is the one that Jesus said to Mary, behold thy son, son, behold thy mother. And can you imagine who was greater person in Jesus' life than his own mother? And he gave the responsibility of taking care of her to John. So I think John knew Jesus pretty good. But when he saw him on the Isle of Patmos, he fell down at his feet as if he was dead. Because he didn't come as the Son of Man, he came as the Son of God. And we're going to see him just as he is. And what's that going to be like? Well, we have a description in the book of Revelation, but I got a funny feeling that doesn't even touch the surface of the magnificence of who Jesus is and what he did for us. Now, for us to exist in this eternity, in 1 Corinthians 15:54, Paul says this, so when this corruptible shall have put on incorruption, and this mortal shall have put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. Someday, what is corruptible? This body that God created for me in my mother's womb, after taking its toll from the womb to the tomb, has become kind of corruptible. But this corruptible body is going to be changed into an incorruptible body. And that which is mortal, you think of the word mortality, somebody died, this body is going to die. But it's going to be made into something that's immortal. It's never going to die. So this body, somehow, it's going to be changed to one that never corrupts. 100 million light years from now, it's still not going to hurt when I go like this. And 100 million light years from now, I'm not going to die because I'm an eternal being. In 1 Corinthians 2:9, but as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. I could sit here all day and just dream and think and try to imagine what it's going to be like, but I just can't do it. I can't, because you can't fit. That'd be like sitting on the shore. I've been in California and sat on the beach and looked at the Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water on the planet Earth. That would be like saying, I got this thimble here, I'm going to put the Pacific Ocean in this thimble. Now I could fill that thimble and say, this thimble is filled with the Pacific Ocean. But I can't say that the Pacific Ocean is entirely in this thimble. My mind is finite. God is infinite. So I can sit here and try to think and imagine and dream and compare it to other things I've heard and seen, but there's no way I can fit the infinite into the finite. But someday I'm going to see him and know him as he really is. One of my favorite scriptures, Jesus said in the Beatitudes, "Blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God." Now, am I pure of heart? If that means perfect, no, sorry, I'm out of luck. But if pure of heart means I love him with every fiber of my being, then I'm pure of heart. And I'm covered in the blood of Jesus. And these, now not these eyeballs, glorified eyeballs, are going to look at the face of God Almighty. And then I love how 1 Corinthians 15:54 ends. And death is swallowed up in victory. See, what Satan did in the Garden of Eden, because he's just insane with his mutiny and insane with his rebellion, is he said, if I can take the thing that God loves, which is man, and I can take the thing that God hates, which is sin, and I can figure out a way to put sin inside man, then I can say, checkmate, I got you. And God just laughed. He says, you're saying checkmate? Not only am I a chess master, I invented the game of chess. And he said, I'm telling you something. I'm going to put enmity between your seed and her seed. And guess what? When we die in Jesus, death is swallowed up by victory. That's why Paul says, death, where's your victory? Grave, where's the sting? You know, we're not like those who die without hope. When I die, now I'm not looking forward to it. I'm not jumping up and down. Oh yeah, I want to die today. But when that happens, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. As soon as I step out of this body, I'm looking for Jesus. Where is he? And he's the one that's going to meet me. So, what do we do? I'm winding down, I promise. What do we do in these three stages of our existence? Well, in the womb, what can we do? We're just innocent bystanders going along for the ride. I can't pick who my mom and dad are, and I can't pick how God's going to form me. If I could have, I would have got different DNA, and I would have never lost my hair when I was 28 years old. I'd be about 4 inches taller, and I'd be about 100 pounds thinner. But I can't pick. You just got to go for the ride. Whatever body he gives you, you got to do the best you can with what you've been given. But it says, and as it is appointed in Hebrews 9:27, it's appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. There's an appointment. God knows when he's going to put you on the planet Earth, to who, what part of the world, what time in history. But this is the other thing. He knows when he's taking you out. So don't worry about it. It'll happen when it's supposed to happen. And then, in the world, what are we supposed to do? This is our journey that we're all in right now. So what are we supposed to do? How do we control this? In 1 Samuel 15:12, it says this. And Samuel said, hath the Lord as a great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. You want to do the best that you can with this time? It comes down to one word: obey. He knows what he's doing. He's got a great track record. Jesus said, be of good cheer, my little children. I've overcome the world. Jesus has brought many, many thousands, if not millions, on their journey from the womb to the tomb into his kingdom. He knows what he's doing. If you were lost in the jungle and you didn't know east from west and north from south, and so all of a sudden you heard this noise And all of a sudden you see someone with a machete chopping away in the thick bush. And there's a tour guide saying, "Hey, how you doing? Follow me, I've gotten people out of here all the time." Would you say, "No, I'm going to make it on my own, I'll figure it out"? Or you say, "Yeah, show me out." Well, Jesus is the one. So obey him. When he says don't do something, don't do it. When he says do something, do it. Just obey him. And let's be honest here. Now, I know you haven't had this problem, but since I've been a Christian now for 46 years, I haven't always been perfect in obeying him. I know you have, but I haven't. But that's why God gives us 1 John 1:9. If we sin, if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness, which means he takes us out of the ditch, puts us back on the narrow road and says, "You ready to keep going?" Say, "Yep, ready to keep going." But the main thing, the most important thing we can do in our journey from the womb to the tomb is just obey. Just trust him. Just give in, surrender to him. He knows what he's doing. And then in eternity, what are we supposed to do in eternity? How do we handle that? We don't. So you just rejoice and enjoy it. You're going to like heaven. You're going to like eternity, I promise you. Here's just a little tiny foretaste. Revelation 21 verse 4. And God shall wipe away all the tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow, nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. I don't know about you, sounds pretty good to me. No more aches and pains. This body's going to work perfectly just the way it was supposed to, even better than when I was 20. It's going to be forever and forever. So in conclusion, having said all that, when you think about it, our time here on earth consists of three. There's that number 3 again. 3 stages. We have the past, the present, and the future. The past is from this point back. The future is from this point forward. Today is yesterday's future. Today is tomorrow's past. Now, I can't go back and change anything in my past. I can lament, I can beat myself up over it, or I can just glean from it, have good memories, but I can't change anything. My future tomorrow, I don't know. Maybe I'm not going to live tomorrow. I don't know. Or I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I think I'm going to get up in the morning, go to work, and I do this, cut the lawn when I come home, and make a few. I think I got it all planned out, but I don't know. That could all change in the blink of an eye. So I can't change the future, and I can't change the past, so I live in the present. And right here, right now, this is the day that the Lord has made, like I first started out with. So rejoice and be glad in it. And listen for that still small voice and obey him. And while we're doing that, in Proverbs 3:5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto your own understanding. Just trust him. Yeah, but when I go home and I turn on the news, don't you know what's going on in the world? I mean, every day you turn on the news and somebody else just got terribly, horrendously murdered or beat up or hurt in some way. And you just say, this is a crazy world. Trust in the Lord. Psalm 91, though 1,000 fall at my side and 10,000 at my right side, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. I mean, everywhere you turn, there's monkeypox, there's COVID, there's chicken pox, I should write down all the different vaccines they want me to get for everything. I'm going to get a hangnail vaccine. I'm going to get a bad hair day vaccine. I mean, they're going to kill you. It's everywhere. You know what? Trust in the Lord. Lean not unto your own understanding. God's faithful. And while we're doing that, while we're obeying, we're listening for that still small voice, and we're trusting him, the last thing we need to do is Matthew 22 and verse 9. Go you therefore into the highways, and as many as you shall find, bid them to the marriage. Guess what? When we get into that last stage of our life, there's going to be a wedding like you ain't never seen in your life. And everybody's invited. I'm going. So when you meet somebody, just say, hey, how you doing? Okay. Well, how would you like to be cheered up? Would you like to go to a wedding? Well, who's getting married? I don't know anybody getting married. Jesus is getting married. He is? Who's he marrying? His bride. Well, who's his bride? I am. You want to be part of the bride? You're welcome. There's an empty seat. Come on. He said, whosoever will. Just try to do everything we can, because the sad fact is, because we are eternal beings, if you're not covered in the blood of Jesus, and you're not following him, and you're not trusting in him, there is an eternity. And that eternity won't be with him. There's only two places in eternity, with him or without him. And God is love. The opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. Separate from God is fear. God is light. In him there's no darkness. The opposite of God is darkness. You want to spend your eternity in darkness and fear, away from God? And see, God's not going to force himself on anybody. You may say, well, I don't want God in my life. You say, okay, I tried to work with you for your 70 to 80 years here on earth, and you said, nope, not interested, so I'm not going to force myself on you, so here's eternity without me. And how sad would that be? How sad. So our job is to just invite everybody to the wedding. It's going to be great. And he'll even give you your clothes. It's a robe of righteousness. Nothing is an accident. God's got everything planned. Just trust him.